The training ground buzzed with energy as the interspecies cadets assembled, their diverse forms a kaleidoscope of galactic ambition. Yet, even in this sea of alien brilliance, the humans stood out, not for their size, strength, or exotic physiology, but for the faint smirks they wore. They had been underestimated before, and Aaron Carter was counting on it. The Interstellar Cadet Exchange Program was a diplomatic experiment designed to foster unity and collaboration among species. For centuries, the galaxy's many civilizations had kept their military academies isolated, training their soldiers and warriors according to species-specific strengths. But in the shadow of a growing galactic threat, cooperation was no longer optional. Thus, the Galactic Concordance decreed that each academy would welcome cadets from other species, forcing rivals to become comrades and challengers to become allies. At the Nexus Academy of Advanced Combat, nestled on a lush, neutral planet, this experiment was already meeting resistance. The Talok cadets, towering bipeds with obsidian scales and fearsome reputations, had little patience for the soft newcomers from Earth. They believed strength was measured in raw power, and by that metric, humans ranked near the bottom. Varnak Cole, a Talok cadet already renowned for his prowess in unarmed combat, made his disdain clear from the moment he entered the training yard. His 7-foot frame exuded intimidation, and his voice carried the gravelly weight of his species' natural authority. Humans, he sneered, looking down at the smaller cadets. Why waste time on a species whose greatest strength is endurance? Erin stood among the human contingent, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Her honey-brown hair was tied back in a practical braid, and her unassuming posture made her seem almost forgettable. That suited her just fine. She wasn't here to prove herself to anyone, at least, not yet. Strength isn't the only thing that matters, Erin muttered, her voice calm but firm. Varnak's reptilian eyes narrowed, catching the challenge in her tone. He tilted his head, his scaled jaw twitching in amusement. Oh? And what does matter, little human? Erin looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time. How you use it? The nearby cadets, both human and alien, stopped their conversations to watch the brewing confrontation. Even the Academy's instructors, hardened veterans of interstellar conflicts, paused to see how this would play out. Varnak chuckled, the sound echoing like a rumble of distant thunder. Then perhaps you'd like to show me how a human uses strength. A sparring match. You and me. The challenge hung in the air, drawing a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Erin's fellow humans glanced at her with a mixture of encouragement and concern. They knew she had been training for years, but this wasn't an ordinary fight. Varnak was a Talok, his kind were practically designed for combat. Erin didn't hesitate. Fine. Name the time. Now, Varnak replied, gesturing toward the sparring ring at the center of the training yard. His smile widened, revealing sharp teeth. Unless, of course, you'd rather wait. Perhaps to grow stronger? A ripple of laughter passed through the Talok contingent, but Erin remained unfazed. She stepped forward, her boots crunching on the gravel, and climbed into the ring. Let's get this over with. The crowd gathered quickly, forming a loose circle around the ring. Cadets from every corner of the galaxy stood shoulder to shoulder, eager to see the spectacle. Instructors moved to the edges, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The Academy's combat matches were strictly regulated, designed to challenge but not endanger. Yet, as Varnak took his position opposite Erin, his massive shadow falling over her like a storm cloud, the tension in the air was palpable. Don't hold back, Erin said, her voice steady. Varnak grinned. I wouldn't dream of it. The signal to begin sounded, and the match was on. The sparring ring hummed with anticipation, the air electric with the clash of two worlds, human ingenuity versus alien dominance. Varnak Cole stood like an unyielding monument of strength, his obsidian scales gleaming under the training yard's artificial sun. Across from him, Erin Carter rolled her shoulders, her stance loose and deceptively casual. One of them would walk out victorious, the other would face humiliation. Varnak launched forward the moment the starting signal echoed, his heavy footfalls shaking the ground. He didn't bother with feints or subtlety, his sheer size and strength were weapons enough. His opening strike, a sweeping blow meant to send Eren flying, came with the precision of a seasoned warrior and the force of a collapsing building. Eren ducked low, her movements fluid and deliberate. The crowd gasped as Varnak's arm sliced through the space where she had stood mere moments ago. She spun to his side, delivering a swift jab to his ribs. It was like punching a wall. Varnak laughed, a deep, resonant sound. "Is that all, human? A tickle?" Eren didn't answer. She never relied on brute force, it wasn't her weapon of choice. Instead, she moved again, circling him, her steps light and agile. Varnak lunged, his massive arm swinging in a deadly arc, but she sidestepped with ease, staying just out of reach. The crowd was mesmerized. The human cadets cheered her agility, while the alien spectators muttered among themselves. Most had expected this fight to be over within seconds. Yet Eren wasn't just surviving, she was making Varnak miss, again and again. But Varnak was no fool. His species had evolved to outlast prey over long hunts, and he quickly adjusted his strategy. Instead of chasing her, he stopped and planted his feet firmly in the center of the ring, waiting. His yellow, slit-pupiled eyes tracked her every move. "You can't dance forever," he growled. Eren smirked. "I don't need forever." She darted in, aiming a quick series of strikes at his knees, one of the few vulnerable spots she'd observed. The Taylok's thick scales protected most of his body, but his joints lacked the same impenetrable armor. Her blows were precise, calculated, each one landing with a sharp crack. Varnak snarled and swung his leg out in a brutal kick. This time, he connected. The force sent Eren sprawling across the ring, her body skidding against the rough floor. The crowd erupted, a mix of cheers and gasps. Varnak stalked forward, towering over her prone form. "Stay down, little human. This doesn't have to get worse." Eren coughed, tasting blood, but her eyes never left his. "Worried I might embarrass you?" She rolled to her feet, her movements slower but deliberate. Her breathing was labored, and pain radiated from her side where his kick had landed. Still, she raised her fists, her defiance unshaken. The crowd roared its approval. Varnak's grin faded. He lunged again, this time feinting a left hook before driving a knee toward her midsection. But Eren wasn't there. She dropped low and twisted around him, locking one of his legs with hers in a sweeping motion. Using his momentum against him, she sent the massive alien stumbling forward. The crowd erupted in shock as Varnak hit the ground, his bulk shaking the ring. Eren didn't waste the opportunity. She pounced, locking his arm in a submission hold designed to exploit the anatomy of larger opponents. It wasn't perfect, Varnak's strength was already breaking her grip, but it was enough to make him hesitate. "Yield," she demanded, her voice steady despite the strain. Varnak's response was a guttural roar. He surged upward, throwing her off him like a rag doll. She hit the ground hard but scrambled to her feet before he could close the distance. "You've got guts, human," he admitted, his breathing heavier now. "But it won't be enough." The signal to pause blared, signaling the end of the first round. The crowd erupted into applause, the energy in the yard reaching a fever pitch. Eren stood tall, bruised and battered but far from beaten. Varnak's expression darkened as he realized what the others were beginning to see. This wasn't a mismatch. It was a fight. "Round 2, Eren said with a smirk. "Ready when you are." The sparring match had shifted from a spectacle to a phenomenon. Every cadet in the training yard, regardless of species, was riveted. Eren Carter, the human cadet who had no right to stand toe-to-toe with a Taylok warrior, wasn't just holding her own, she was forcing Varnak Cole, a living embodiment of brute strength, to take her seriously. The second round began with Varnak altering his approach. Gone was the overconfidence that had marked his earlier movements. Now he stalked Eren with a calculated precision, his steps measured, his body poised. The Taylok cadet had realized what many in the crowd were beginning to suspect: Eren wasn't simply nimble. She was studying him. Eren, for her part, felt every bruise, every strained muscle, but she wouldn't let it show. Pain was something she'd grown familiar with during her years of training on Earth. Hours in the dojo, weeks perfecting techniques, and months enduring setbacks had taught her one thing: adaptability was her greatest weapon. Varnak feinted to the left, and Erin reacted on instinct, ducking low. She felt the shift in the air before she saw it, his real attack, a vicious uppercut aimed to catch her off guard. She twisted mid-duck, narrowly avoiding the strike, and countered with a swift kick to the side of his knee. The impact wasn't enough to cause damage, but it was enough to unbalance him. Varnak stumbled slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You're fast," he admitted, his tone grudgingly respectful. "But speed won't save you forever." "Who said anything about forever?" Erin quipped, circling him. She kept her breathing steady, her hands raised in a defensive posture. "I just need long enough." The crowd murmured at her confidence, and even some of the Taylock spectators exchanged impressed glances. Humans were known for their endurance, but this display of tactical brilliance was unexpected. Varnak roared, charging forward in a sudden burst of speed. Erin darted to the side, narrowly avoiding his grasp. He pivoted with surprising agility for his size, his tail sweeping toward her legs in a calculated move. Erin jumped, the tail passing inches below her feet, and landed in a crouch. Before Varnak could recover, she sprang upward, delivering a sharp elbow strike to his jaw. The impact forced him back a step, but it wasn't the force of the strike that stunned him, it was the audacity. No one had ever dared to get that close to him in a fight. "What are you doing?" Varnak growled, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Winning," Erin replied simply. She knew she couldn't overpower him. Taylocks were stronger, faster, and more durable than humans. But she'd noticed something in the first round. Varnak relied on his species' natural advantages so much that he left openings, subtle but exploitable. His strikes were powerful but predictable, and his defenses had blind spots she could use. Erin began to press the advantage, weaving in and out of his reach. She struck at weak points, his knees, the underside of his arms, the exposed joints between his scales. None of her attacks did significant damage on their own, but they added up. Varnak's movements became less fluid, his frustration mounting with each near miss. "You're stalling," he accused, his breath coming heavier now. "I'm thinking," Erin corrected, her tone light. "You should try it sometime." The crowd erupted into laughter, and Varnak's expression darkened. With a roar, he unleashed a flurry of attacks, each one faster and more aggressive than the last. Erin dodged and deflected, her reflexes pushed to their limit. She felt the strain in her muscles, the ache in her ribs, but she refused to back down. Then she saw it, a pattern in his strikes, a slight hesitation before he shifted his weight. It was a split-second opening, but it was enough. Varnak lunged, his massive fist arcing toward her. Erin stepped inside his reach, her body moving on instinct. She twisted, using his momentum against him, and hooked her arm around his outstretched limb. With a fluid motion, she leveraged his weight and sent him crashing to the ground. The ring shook with the impact, and the crowd erupted into cheers and shouts. Erin stepped back, breathing hard, but keeping her stance ready. Varnak lay on the ground for a moment, stunned, before pushing himself up. His expression wasn't angry, it was something else. Respect. "You've made your point," he rumbled, rising to his feet. "But this isn't over." Erin smirked. Looking forward to round 3. As the crowd dispersed, the tension in the air lingered. Erin knew the match wasn't just about proving herself, it was about challenging perceptions. And judging by the murmurs of admiration from the other cadets, she had already succeeded. The sparring match wasn't over, it had become a proving ground. Erin Carter had defied expectations, but Varnak Cole, the pride of the Taylock, was not one to accept defeat lightly. As the cadets gathered again for the third and final round, tension rippled through the crowd like an electric charge. Varnak stood in the center of the ring, rolling his shoulders as he glared at Erin. His earlier arrogance had faded, replaced by a quiet intensity. For the first time in the match, he regarded her not as a weaker opponent, but as a genuine threat. The Taylock warrior was done underestimating humans. Across the ring, Erin steadied her breathing, her body aching from the punishment it had endured. She could feel the eyes of the entire academy on her, but she tuned them out. It wasn't about the crowd, it wasn't even about Varnak. It was about proving to herself, and everyone else, that humanity belonged here. The signal to begin blared, and Varnak moved with a swiftness that belied his size. Erin anticipated his opening strike, a feint designed to test her reflexes. She sidestepped, but Varnak was already pivoting, his tail sweeping low. This time, Erin couldn't dodge fast enough. The tail caught her ankle, sending her sprawling to the ground. The crowd gasped as Varnak closed the distance, looming over her. He reached down, claws extended, aiming to pin her in place. But Erin wasn't beaten yet. She twisted onto her back and kicked upward with both legs, striking the underside of his jaw. The force wasn't enough to hurt him, but it threw off his balance just long enough for her to roll away and spring to her feet. "You're learning," Varnak growled, rubbing his jaw. There was no mockery in his voice now, only grudging respect. "About time you noticed," Erin shot back, her lips curling into a smirk. The crowd erupted into cheers, but neither combatant paid them any attention. Varnak lunged again, his strikes faster and more precise than before. Erin dodged and deflected, each movement a dance of survival. She knew she couldn't afford to take another direct hit, her ribs were already bruised, and her strength was waning. As the fight progressed, Erin noticed something: Varnak's movements were powerful but repetitive. His reliance on brute strength had made him predictable. She began to counter his attacks with calculated strikes, aiming for the same weak points she'd identified earlier. Her blows weren't enough to bring him down, but they were enough to frustrate him. "You fight like a predator," Varnak admitted, circling her. His breathing was heavier now, his scaled chest rising and falling with effort. "But predators need strength to finish the hunt." Erin wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, her eyes never leaving his. "Strength helps," she said, shifting into a defensive stance. "But it's not the only thing that matters." Varnak roared and charged again, this time feinting a high strike before pivoting into a low sweep. Erin saw the move coming and leapt over his leg, landing lightly behind him. Before he could turn, she aimed a precise strike at the back of his knee, causing him to stumble. This was her moment. Erin moved quickly, wrapping her arm around his neck in a chokehold while locking her legs around his torso. It was a risky maneuver. If he broke free, she'd be left vulnerable, but it was her best chance to end the fight. Varnak thrashed, his powerful arms clawing at her, but she held on, tightening her grip. The crowd leaned forward in tense silence as Varnak's movements slowed. He dropped to one knee, his breathing labored. Erin's muscles burned, every ounce of her strength focused on maintaining the hold. "Yield," she demanded, her voice strained but resolute. Varnak let out a guttural growl, his pride warring with the reality of his situation. Finally, with a slow, deliberate motion, he tapped the ground, a universal gesture of surrender. The training yard erupted into cheers and applause, the sound almost deafening. Erin released her hold and stumbled back, her chest heaving. Varnak remained on one knee, his gaze fixed on her. For a moment, neither spoke. "You've earned my respect, human," he said at last, his voice low but sincere. "Few can say that." Erin nodded, her expression unreadable. "And you've earned mine." As Varnak rose to his feet, the crowd parted, making way for the Academy's instructors. Captain Yelena Price, Erin's mentor, approached with a proud smile. "Impressive work, Carter. You've done humanity proud." Erin smiled, the weight of the match finally settling on her shoulders. "Thanks, Captain." But even as she basked in the moment, Erin couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Academy had seen what humans were capable of, but the galaxy was watching, too. And she had a feeling the real challenges were yet to come. The crowd's roar still echoed across the training yard as Erin Carter stepped out of the ring, her body aching but her head held high. She had done what no one, including herself, had expected. She'd beaten a Taylock in fair combat. But the weight of victory was far heavier than she'd anticipated. Varnak stood in the center of the ring for a moment longer, towering but oddly still. His chest heaved with deep breaths, his sharp claws flexing at his sides. The intensity of the match was fading, replaced by an expression Erin couldn't quite place, something between respect and reluctant admiration. When his gaze finally met hers, it wasn't with the scorn he had carried into the fight. "You've earned this, human," he said, his voice low but carrying. "But don't let it go to your head. A single victory doesn't make you invincible." Erin nodded, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Noted," she replied simply, her tone neither smug nor dismissive. She turned and stepped out of the ring, the weight of her bruised body catching up with her. The gathered cadets, a mix of humans and aliens, parted as she walked. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones around her, but there was no mistaking the shift in their expressions. Where once there had been skepticism and even pity, now there was awe. For the first time, Erin felt like she had truly earned her place among them. "Carter." Captain Yelena Price called, striding toward her. The veteran human officer had been watching from the edge of the crowd, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the fight. "You just made history, kid." "History?" Erin asked, wincing slightly as she rolled her shoulder. "I was just trying not to get flattened." Yelena chuckled, her expression softening. "You proved that humans aren't just survivors, we're competitors. Every cadet here is going to remember this day, and so will their instructors." "Well done." Erin wanted to smile, but the exhaustion weighed her down. "Thanks, Captain," she said. "But right now, I'd settle for an ice pack and a nap." Yelena grinned. "Get yourself checked out in the med bay. You've earned it." As Erin limped toward the Academy's medical wing, Varnak caught up with her. The imposing Taylok cast a long shadow over her, but this time, his presence wasn't hostile. "You fight differently from any opponent I've faced," he said, his voice neutral but curious. "Taylok warriors are trained to overpower and outlast. You've adept." Erin glanced up at him, her expression guarded. "That's what humans do. We're not the strongest or the fastest, so we make do with what we've got." Varnak tilted his head, considering her words. "It's frustrating," he admitted. "To face an opponent I couldn't predict. But it's also admirable. You've earned my respect, Erin Carter." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that your way of saying I should be flattered?" Varnak's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Perhaps. But don't expect me to go easy on you next time." "Good," Erin replied. "I wouldn't want you to." Word of the match spread quickly through the academy. By the next morning, Erin's name was on everyone's lips. In the cafeteria, cadets from other species approached her, some offering congratulations, others asking about her techniques. Erin answered politely, but the sudden attention made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Enjoying the fame, a familiar voice asked. Erin turned to see Varnak standing behind her, a tray of food in his hands. "Not particularly," she admitted. "I'd rather get back to training." Varnak chuckled, setting his tray down across from hers. "Good. You'll need it. I've already requested a rematch." Erin smirked. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Taylok warriors don't accept defeat easily," he said. "And besides, I think we both learned something from that match. Perhaps next time, we can push each other even further." She studied him for a moment, sensing the genuine respect behind his words. "Maybe," she said. "But don't expect me to make it easy for you. I wouldn't dream of it." Later that day, Erin was summoned to the Academy's council chamber. The headmaster, an elder Vran with shimmering fur, regarded her with a solemn expression. "Cadet Carter," he said, his deep voice echoing through the room. "Your performance in yesterday's match has garnered attention beyond the Academy. Representatives from the Galactic Concordance have taken notice." Erin frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," the headmaster continued, "that your actions have demonstrated the value of humanity's contributions to interspecies cooperation. You've proven that strength comes in many forms. As such, the Concordance has requested that you join an experimental task force, a unit comprised of cadets from multiple species." Erin blinked, the weight of the offer sinking in. "A task force? For what?" The headmaster's expression turned grave. There are threats on the horizon that require more than traditional military tactics. Your adaptability, your ingenuity, they may be exactly what we need. Erin hesitated, the enormity of the situation pressing down on her. But then she straightened her shoulders, the resolve that had carried her through the match returning. When do I start? The headmaster smiled faintly. Soon. Very soon. Erin Carter sat in the quiet solitude of the observation deck, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The academy was behind her now, and ahead lay the unknown, a task force forged from the ambitions of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. The echoes of her sparring match with Varnak had propelled her into a larger game, one where victory and survival meant far more than personal glory. The task force briefing had been short and unsettling. Representatives from the Galactic Concordance spoke in vague terms, their tone serious but guarded. Erin had been introduced to her new teammates, a Zarek engineer whose compound eyes darted nervously as he analyzed everything in the room, a towering Urath tactician who moved with the grace of a predator, and a Talok combat specialist. Varnak. Erin had raised an eyebrow when she saw him, but Varnak only smirked. Looks like you're stuck with me, he said, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and determination. Don't slow me down, Erin quipped, earning a rare chuckle from the Talok. The mission briefing painted a grim picture. Unidentified incursions had been detected along the outermost edges of Concordance-controlled space. Entire colonies had gone silent, and initial reconnaissance teams hadn't returned. The task force's objective was to investigate and, if necessary, neutralize the threat. As the shuttle carried them toward the last known location of a lost colony, Erin found herself seated next to Varnak. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You're not worried? Varnak asked finally, breaking the silence. Worried doesn't help, Erin replied, her gaze fixed on the stars. Prepared does. Varnak tilted his head, a faint hum of approval in his throat. That's what makes humans interesting. You don't let fear control you. Erin turned to him, her expression unreadable. You don't know what I feel, Varnak. But I've learned how to use it. The shuttle descended on a world shrouded in eerie silence. The colony had once been a bustling hub of interspecies cooperation, but now, its streets were deserted, its structures lifeless. The team disembarked cautiously, weapons ready and senses heightened. Signs of combat, muttered the Zarek engineer, pointing to scorch marks along a nearby wall. But no bodies. No debris. It's like they disappeared. Erin crouched to examine the ground. The soil was disturbed, as if something heavy had moved through recently. Tracks, she said, tracing the faint impressions with her fingers. Bipedal. Large. Whatever did this wasn't subtle. Varnak stepped closer, his keen eyes scanning the horizon. Predators. They didn't just attack, they hunted. The team moved through the colony in tense silence, their footsteps echoing unnervingly. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far, every sound too loud in the oppressive quiet. Erin felt the weight of the moment pressing on her, but she refused to falter. She wasn't just representing herself anymore, she was representing humanity. When the attack came, it was swift and brutal. From the shadows emerged creatures unlike anything Erin had ever seen, towering, insectoid beasts with serrated limbs and carapaces that shimmered with an unnatural sheen. The first strike took the team by surprise, but they recovered quickly, their training kicking in. Defensive positions, barked the Urath tactician, his voice calm despite the chaos. Erin darted to cover, her heart pounding as the creatures closed in. They were fast and coordinated, their movements almost too fluid to track. One lunged toward her, its jagged limbs slicing through the air. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, and fired her weapon at its exposed underbelly. The creature shrieked and collapsed, but another took its place almost immediately. Varnak fought beside her, his massive frame a wall of defiance against the onslaught. He swung a Talok warblade with practiced precision, cleaving through the attackers with raw power. Stay close, he shouted over the din. I'm not going anywhere. Erin replied, her voice sharp as she fired off another shot. The battle was chaotic, but the team's diversity proved to be their greatest strength. The Xeric engineer used his advanced scanner to identify weak points in the creature's anatomy, while the Urath tactician coordinated their movements with surgical precision. Aaron and Varnak, the unlikely duo, took the brunt of the melee, their combined skills keeping the creatures at bay. When the dust settled, the colony was silent once more. The team stood in the aftermath, battered but victorious. Aaron leaned against the crumbled wall, catching her breath as she surveyed the scene. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," she said, her voice laced with exhaustion. Varnak chuckled, his scaled face split by a rare grin. "Perhaps humans aren't so fragile after all." Aaron smirked, glancing up at him. "And maybe Talox can learn a thing or two about teamwork." As the team regrouped, the Xeric engineer approached with a data pad. "There's something you need to see," he said, his voice trembling. He held out the device, displaying a transmission they had intercepted. It was a warning, broadcast in an alien language, but the tone was unmistakable. This was only the beginning. Aaron exchanged a glance with Varnak, the weight of their mission settling over them. The galaxy was watching, but so was something far more dangerous. "Let them come," Aaron said, her voice steady. "We'll be ready."